Hi, welcome to Movies Moment. Today we are going to explain a movie called Irish Wish. Spoilers ahead. Subscribe if you like this and catch us on the next one. Take care.
The film opens with Maddie heading to a red carpet event celebrating the launch of a book by Paul Kennedy, her dream man, for whom she served as editor. As she steps out of her cab, she meets Paul, who has just arrived. He introduces Maddie to the press, acknowledging her talent, especially as his editor for the book. Paul also mentions he has something important to discuss with her, leaving Maddie eager to find out more. Inside the venue, Maddie's mother, Rosemary, calls, asking if Maddie has confessed her feelings to Paul. Maddie explains that she hasn't told anyone about her feelings, not even her friends Heather and Emma, as she's not ready. She shares with her mother that Paul wants to talk to her, hoping it might be the perfect opportunity to confess. After ending the call with her mother, Maddie meets her friends. Heather comments that Maddie's name should be on the book cover alongside Paul's, given her contributions. Emma, noticing Paul is Irish, expresses interest in him and asks Maddie if he's single. Maddie avoids answering, choosing instead to go and find Paul. When they meet, Paul brings up what he wanted to discuss, taking their working relationship to the next level. Maddie interprets this as a romantic advance and agrees enthusiastically. However, Paul actually proposes they collaborate on his next book, leaving Maddie disappointed, though she hides her feelings. He mentions her desire to write her own book, promising to support her, but notes it might take time to achieve their dreams. Later, Paul runs into Maddie's friends, and Emma immediately recognizes him. Introducing herself, Emma engages Paul in conversation. Maddie, observing their interaction, grows anxious and interrupts, reminding Paul of others waiting to speak with him. After Paul's reading, Maddie formally introduces him to her friends. Emma expresses her admiration for Paul, capturing his attention. She even asks him to sign her book, which he does. Both Maddie and Heather sense a spark between Emma and Paul, making Maddie uncomfortable. She interrupts again, hoping to cut their conversation short. While they're in the taxi, Emma tells her friends she feels a connection with Paul. Jealous and in denial, Maddie insists he behaves that way with everyone. When Emma shows them the book he signed with his number inside, Maddie, though still in denial, begins to wonder if Emma and Paul are truly a match. Months later, Paul and Emma are now engaged, with their wedding just days away in Ireland. At the airport, Maddie mistakenly picks up a piece of luggage that actually belongs to a man named James Thomas. Realizing her error, she immediately goes to request assistance for her missing luggage. Meanwhile, Paul approaches Maddie and thanks her for introducing him to Emma. Since her luggage might take a while to locate, Maddie decides to stay at the airport for a bit. She insists Paul go on ahead, assuring him she'll take a taxi to their house later. Unable to find a taxi, Maddie ends up on a bus, where she encounters James again. She learns he's a nature photographer, though she doesn't catch his name. During the ride, Maddie accidentally drops her book, which James picks up. He mentions he didn't enjoy the book and even criticizes the author. Maddie disagrees with his opinion, and as she gets off the bus, she explains she was the editor of the book, prompting a mild apology from James. When Maddie arrives at the Kennedys' residence, she's welcomed by Heather and Paul's brother, Corey. Paul then announces he has a surprise trip planned for everyone. Before they leave, Heather notices that Maddie seems a bit off. Still preoccupied with her friend's engagement, Maddie brushes it off, assuring Heather that she's fine. The five of them head to Loch Tay for a picnic, and eventually, they take a boat ride. There are 2 boats, each only fitting 2 people. Corey suggests Maddie squeeze into theirs, but she decides to walk instead. As she walks, she discovers a beautiful cherry blossom tree and sits on a bench nearby to talk to her mother. Maddie expresses some regret, telling her mother that things would have been different if she had followed her advice earlier. Her mother encourages her to view it as a lesson and start speaking up for herself, but Maddie feels it's too late for that. Their conversation is interrupted by some technical difficulties, and a mysterious woman approaches Maddie, asking about a wish she was making. The woman explains that the bench she's sitting on is a wishing chair, and Maddie must make her wish properly. Though hesitant and skeptical, Maddie decides to give it a try. She sits in the chair, closes her eyes, and wishes aloud, "I wish I was marrying Paul Kennedy." Nothing seems to change, but then a strong wind picks up, and Maddie wakes up in her bed, thinking it was all just a strange dream. As Maddie gets out of bed, she trips over her suitcase, the one she had lost at the airport, and is surprised to see Paul, freshly showered. She leaves her bedroom and finds Emma, who appears unprepared. Confused by what's happening, she tells Heather about the bizarre dream, but Heather dismisses it as pre-wedding anxiety. However, Heather soon makes Maddie realize something startling. She is, in fact, marrying Paul Kennedy. Maddie is struck by the realization that her wish may have come true, and excitement builds within her. Later, Maddie and Heather return from picking apples, and Paul's mother, Olivia, greets them. She mentions their appointment at the tailor's for Maddie's wedding dress fitting. While Maddie is examining her reflection in the mirror, wearing the dress, she suddenly spots the woman from the wishing chair. Maddie rushes out to find her, but instead, she encounters James again. She notices that James is carrying a copy of the book Paul recently published and mistakenly assumes he dislikes Paul. James, however, is unaware of what she's talking about and doesn't even remember their previous encounter on the bus and even in the airport, leading Maddie to realize that things have changed not because of her wish, but in a way she didn't expect. Maddie's friends and Olivia approach her, and Olivia assumes Maddie has found a wedding photographer. However, Maddie insists that James is not that kind of photographer. Olivia offers James the job of photographing Maddie and Paul's wedding, but he declines, explaining that he doesn't photograph people. Olivia, however, triples his fee, which convinces him to accept. Paul eventually meets James while Olivia discusses what kind of wedding photos she envisions for Maddie and her son. They schedule a photo shoot for the following morning. That evening, however, Maddie accidentally punches Paul when he surprises her by going in for a hug. The next day, Maddie ends up going alone with James for the photo shoot, as she accidentally punches Paul, leaving a bruise on his eye, and her friends are busy getting manicures and pedicures. On their way to the photo shoot location, Maddie opens up to James about her life. He asks if she's ever thought about writing her own book, and Maddie admits she's been trying, but it's been difficult for her lately. They eventually arrive at the cliffs of Maher to begin the photo shoot, where Maddie continues to share her thoughts with James. Meanwhile, back at the house, Paul tends to a bruise on his eye. Emma approaches him, asking what happened, and helps him by applying a cold compress. Their brief interaction creates an undeniable tension, leaving both of them feeling like they may be meant for each other. On their way home in a storm, Maddie and James detoured to a pub after a fallen tree blocked the road. Maddie left Paul a voice message about their change of plans. Spending the night together, Maddie and James opened up, discovering more about each other and feeling a newfound comfort. The next morning, they arrived at the Kennedy residence for the wedding rehearsal. Since Maddie is late, Emma had stood in for her with Paul. When Maddie took over, the rehearsal reached the kiss the bride moment, but she was distracted by a woman in the stained glass who winked at her, causing her to faint. She later identified the woman as Saint Bridget. At dinner with family and friends, Corey suggested a pop quiz for the engaged couple. During the game, James noticed Maddie struggling with answers about herself, despite having confided these details to him the previous night. Later, he confronted her, sensing that she and Paul barely knew each other. Maddie defended herself, but before leaving, James warned her not to make another mistake. Rosemary calls Maddie to inform her that she's just booked a flight to Ireland. However, the flight information display screen suddenly malfunctions, leading Rosemary to believe she needs to leave immediately. She ends the call with Maddie, and while on her way out, she encounters Saint Bridget and unexpectedly trips, falling to the floor. Back in her room, Maddie, now alone, goes to the window and notices Emma and Paul together on the patio. She's momentarily shocked but quickly brushes it off, reminding herself that they were always meant to be together. On her wedding day, Maddie met with James, apologizing for their conversation the night before. She admitted she wasn't sure if this life was meant for her, and he encouraged her to be honest with herself. Paul saw them together and walked away, while James questioned if Paul was truly the one Maddie wanted, noting her sadness despite her claim that marrying Paul was her dream. Before the ceremony, Maddie confided in the priest about a wish she'd made to Saint Bridget. He cautioned her, explaining that Saint Bridget grants wish based on need, not want. Later, Emma revealed her feelings for Paul, hinting they might be together in another life. Maddie promised to set things right. The wedding is underway, with all the guests, groom, groomsmen, and bridesmaids already present. When Maddie arrives, she's dressed in a simple dress, not a wedding gown. She introduces herself as the bride, but quickly reveals that she doesn't truly love Paul. Paul, suspecting James is behind Maddie's sudden change, believes their earlier interaction is to blame. Maddie, however, confronts Paul, pointing out that she saw him and Emma talking. Paul dismisses her concerns, insisting that it's irrelevant, and continues accusing James of stealing his bride. James bravely reveals that he is not the thief, but Paul is, especially when it comes to Maddie's latest published book, which Paul claimed to have written. Enraged by the accusation, Paul lashes out and fights James. Meanwhile, Maddie receives a call from Rosemary, who's injured, and she confesses to her mother that this wedding isn't her dream. She then follows James, who admits he may have influenced her choice. James believes his only option is to leave her, but Maddie insists she can't be happy without him and believes they're meant to be. Sadly, James disagrees, bidding his farewell. To make things right, Maddie immediately heads to Loch Tay to unwish her wish. She tells Saint Bridget that she has learned her lesson. Following the proper procedure for wishing, Maddie sits in the wishing chair, waits for the wind, and takes back her wish. Afterward, Maddie finds herself preparing for Emma and Paul's wedding once again. Heather approaches her, urging her to get dressed, and soon after, Rosemary calls, revealing that she wasn't injured after all. They share a brief moment of reassurance. Emma and Paul's wedding successfully concludes, and Maddie notices a photographer calling himself James, but it's not the same person. At the reception, Paul informs Maddie that he received a call from a publisher interested in a sequel to the book, but since he'll be busy with his honeymoon, he suggests Maddie start the story without him. Now a changed person, Maddie speaks up for herself and declines Paul's offer. She expresses that she still isn't receiving proper credit for their supposed upcoming book and explains to him that this isn't how the team is supposed to work. Later, Maddie runs into James once more. With the insights she gained from her alternate reality, she asks for his advice as a nature photographer since she's planning to write a book about the cliffs of Moher. James, who loves the place, agrees, and Maddie suggests they visit together sometime. In the final scene at the cliffs of Moher, Maddie and Paul share a quiet moment. Maddie hints at the memories from her alternate reality, and though Paul senses the depth behind her words, he doesn't fully understand. Unbeknownst to him, it's Paul's actions that help Maddie realize what it truly means to speak for herself, and what love really is.